Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
Being that tonight is Tisha B'Av, so this will be dedicated to matters around this day, as the Torah dictates. Torah is Chayenu ve'erich Yameinu. It's our life and our sustenance 24/7, all days of the year, including on Tisha B'Av. However, different days and different time periods, we learn different parts of Torah. So certain parts of Torah you're allowed to learn on a night and day of Tisha B'Av. Anything connected to Tisha B'Av, to Avelis. So that's what we'll focus on. And we'll continue next week where we left off in Tanya chapter 26. And interestingly, there's a connection, of course, to Tanya as well, which talks about revealing the deeper divine good, even in darkness. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it's dedicated in honor and memory of Rab Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rab Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yael HaKoyen Khan Olav Shalom, and it's also in schus and merit of Rav Zev Yecheskel HaKoyen and Risha Katz LeErich Yomim V'Shonim Tevis for many long years. And we're also dedicating it to all the Yidden everywhere in the world, especially in Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Asher Eini Hashem Elokecha Bo, Mereish Shana Vad Achri Shana. And indeed, on this very Tisha B'Av, we should already have Yehovcha Yomim Eil L'Sosin L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevim, as the Medrash says, that this day should become the Moed Hachi Gadol, the greatest Yom Tov, because the greater the darkness, the more power it gets transformed to. Which is a good segue here. The Arizal tells us the reason we say Nachem tomorrow, Tisha B'Av in the afternoon by Mincha. Nachem is, of course, the blessing of consolation, of comfort, because that's when Mashiach was born. Based on a Medrash in Eicha Rabbah, Eicha, that we say tonight, in Eicha Rabbah, the Medrash, that talks about the traveler. He was traveling in the north of Israel, and he sees, of all people, an Arab farmer who has a cow, and the cow suddenly groans. And the Arab farmer tells the person traveling, your Beis Hamikdash was just destroyed. Sad, tragic. He groans again, the cow, goes to Porose a second time, and the Arab farmer of all people says, Leil the Mashiach Shel Yisrael, Mashiach was just born. Seems like a very strong contrast. Yeah, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the lowest point possible, birth of Moshiach. But you see from that on Tisha B'Av, you have the birth of Mashiach. And when in the throes and the darkest moments, when the fire were at its highest, when the Beis Hamikdash was burning. And the reason is because in Torah and Yiddishkeit, even the darkest is all in order to bring something greater. And that's why we say Nachem. So even though Tisha B'Av, yes, is the saddest day of the Jewish calendar, it also has the power and the potency to become the greatest day. And that's why, indeed, in a few days from now, we'll have Chamisha Asar B'Av. Lo Yehoy Yom Tov L'Yisrael Ki Chamisha Asar B'Av Ki Yom HaKippur. Yom HaKippurim we can understand. It's the greatest day. Salachti Kidvarecha. Matan Torah of the second Luchis, and all the qualities of Yom Kippur. But what's Chamisha Asar B'Av? So the Mishnah continues and asks why. The Gemara talks about it. Why? Says that Izal, that all the reasons, the ultimate reason is because it came after the Yerid Gdela, the great descent of Tisha B'Av. Yerid Atzuma, the flaw, I think he says the words, an awesome descent of what? Of Malchus. Beis Hamikdash is Malchus, b'shachanti b'seicham. God's presence in this world. That was the ultimate tragedy. That until that point, Shanti v'shachanti b'seichem and Beis Hamikdash for 410 years by his tradition, 70 years later, the Bayis Sheni was built, 420 years. And the structure of the Beis Hamikdash is no longer v'shachanti b'seichem. So the stalkus of the 9 spheres of Chochmah through Yesod from Malchus. So Malchus is left, Eicha Yoshva Badat. Alas, Eicha. She sits alone. Who's she? It's talking about Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is Yerushalayim, Malchus. Malchus became separate in the stalkus of the 9 spheres. Stalkus means the concealment. And from there on is Golu, the Edem, Shechina Imam. So we have the Shechina is also Begalusa, in Golus. Our Aveda is to correct and repair that and return the spheres, that we have all the 10 spheres b'shleimus. So what do you have? 9 days. The 9th of Av is 9 and not 10, like it says in Sefer Yetzirah. It talks about the 10 spheres is a Mispar Shalom, a complete cycle. Eser v'lei Tisha, Eser v'lei Achad Oser. 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11, not 9. Why 9 is the 9 spheres and Malchus is concealed. It's like the moon. Golus Ashchina, the moon is called Pagam Halavana, the injury, the wound to the moon, the wound to Malchus. And our job is to reconnect the two and rebuild. And that indeed is Chamisha Asr, as the Mekubalim and the Kabbalah Chassidus explains. That's not just the Esr, you have 10 plus 5, Yud K. Tezvav, Chamisha Asr Ba'av. And that indeed is similar also to Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur also came after a great Yerida. They built the Egel, the golden calf. And it took Moshe 80 days to gain forgiveness. And then finally on Yom Kippur, Tshuva, he comes down with the second Luchas. Tisha B'Av, we still need the Aliyah. So Chamisha Asar B'Av, we have a similarity to Yom Kippur. Another interesting thing. This month, Tisha B'Av, Av is the Mazel of Av is Aryeh. So Aryeh has a negative side to it and it has a positive side. The negative side is, as the Medrash in Yalkut Shmeini says, the Yovei Aryeh, which is Zevu Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed from Babylon, who destroyed from Bavel, Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, destroyed the first Beis Hamikdash. He came, he was called Aryeh, a lion of Klippa and the Umazeh from the negative side, came in the month of Aryeh, the month of lion, of Leo, which is the Mazel of and destroyed Ariel. The Beis Hamikdash is also called Aryeh. Almanas, says the Medrash, again, there's no such thing as a negative on its own. Just like the cow that groaned on the destruction also groaned in the birth of Moshiach, that the whole destruction is Almanas, says the Yalkut Shmeini, on condition that Yovei Aryeh, the Eibishter is called Aryeh, lion. Aryeh Shog Mila Yira. In the month of the lion, of the Yivna Ariel, and will rebuild the Beis Hamikdash Shlishi. So you see this dual element throughout. So obviously we have to recognize, and we're saddened, and we grieve and mourn. We lower the lights, we sit on low chairs, and we honor, obviously, destruction, because it's Talkus Hashchina. But we have to know it's Almanas. That when we do what we have to do, our Aveda, including the Aveda of Tisha B'Av, we help reveal the Mashiach that was born in this darkness. It's a powerful Torah. Maimer Chazal, it says that when Nebuchadnezzar, Bavel, entered the Beis Hamikdash, so they saw the Kruvim, Mu'urin Zebezeh. We know when the Yidden was Edison and Shalmokim, they were in God's favor, the Kruvim, the 2 cherubs on top of the Odin of the Ark, the Holy Ark and the Kodesh Kodashim, were facing each other. A sign of love. When they were not in God's favor, they were doing something wrong, they were facing back to back. It was a miracle. So the question is asked, the time of the Churban Beis Hamikdash, that would be the time that you'd think God is most upset at the Yidden. due to the chatoim pnei chateinu galinim artzenu, due to our sins. So why were the Kruvim facing each other? So the Sfarim say, Chassidish Sfarim, and the Rebbe brings it, that when a Baal Holach l'Medina Sayam chayiv lifkides ishtei, when a person is going to travel away from home, Medina Sayam, to another country, he has to be intimate with his spouse. Because the Eibishter knew the Golus was beginning, and Kutchabrichu v'Shchinta were going to be separated, Shchanti b'Seicham, and Baal Holach Medina Sayam. So at that moment, he saw the deepest love. As it says, Shofar Chamoseh, he poured out his wrath, Al Eitzim Ba'avonim, on the wood and the stones of the Beis Hamikdash. He didn't destroy the Yidden, he destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. So in a way, it was an expression of profound love. Yidden he'll not destroy, because that's his spouse. Yom Chasanosei Zeh Matan Torah. By Matan Torah was the Chasan, especially Yom Kippur. They already went through a crisis, the crisis of Chet HaEgel, and found each other again, Hashem and the Yidden, through Moshe Rabbeinu. Salachti kidvarecha. So this doesn't take away from the pain, doesn't take away from the separation, and the golus, and the bitter golus that we're already here almost 2,000 years. But it also tells us there's a profound love in there, the fact that Yidden are here, despite such a destruction, and despite thousands of years, as I said, almost 2,000 years, shows the profound love, which will be revealed, of course, with Mashiach, born on Tisha B'Av, the Gula Amitis Vashlema with the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi. So, with all this day has, on one side, there's also the other side. And we have to keep in mind both elements, which also explains the Gemara in Tainus that says, Kashem she mishanichnas of mamaytim b'sicha, kach mishanichnas of the marban b'simcha. Just as we enter of, we diminish in joy, so too when we enter other, we increase in joy. What's the equation here? Two separate worlds. What's the kashem? Just because the word simcha, this one, but this is diminished and this is increasing. Because they're all part of one coin. They're all two sides of one coin. It's all part of one cycle, one galgal hachezer. Someone once came to the Rebbe Rashab, and he was going through difficult times financially, I believe. And the Rebbe Rashab at the time, this was in Vienna, Austria, I believe, was one of the first Ferris wheels, was then invented during the World's Fair, that period of time. I believe a picture of it came to the Rebbe Rashab and he saw it. And he said, everything we have a lesson in life. What do we learn from a Ferris wheel? That life is like a wheel, a Ferris wheel. If you're on top, it's inevitable as the wheel turns that there'll be times you'll be lower, down to the bottom. But when you're on the bottom, it's a guarantee that you'll ultimately go up to the top. And you have to know that life is a cycle. And that's a cycle of Oder and of. We have to respect the cycle. Under a chuppah, we break a glass. Why? Chuppah is the highest point of simcha. Why do we have to remind ourselves of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? But why? Of all times, you could do it later, at the end of the wedding. Because we have to always know it's one big cycle, it's one story. When you remember the brokenhearted and those that there's breaks in this world, even when you're in a moment of high joy, of your own simcha, your own chasana, you don't just completely self-contained and celebrating, but you know there's still a broken world. Shviras HaKelim, broken hearts, a broken Yerushalayim, a broken wall. Then when you're in a situation where it may not be always so revealed, it also won't be completely 100%. Just like you don't have 100% joy, you remember that there's another part of the story. So even when you have something that's very negative in your life, and God forbid no one should ever know, you keep in mind, you remember, and you are remembered, that there's also joy in your life. So there's no such thing as just absolute one or the other. They come together. Hazerim bedima berina yekteru. Those that sow with tears will reap with joy. The Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. Mashiach is born. They always come together. Now we have to do our part, our work, to reveal that deeper joy. That's why we say these days will be transformed, not be eliminated, transformed, because they have power, potency and power. But you have to reveal the power. Rabbi Akiva saw it. The end of Masechta Makos, he looked at the Har HaBayis, and his colleagues looked at the Har HaBayis. They saw desolation. So did he. And Rabbi Akiva for sure sat Shiva on Tisha B'Av. But he also saw something more. He saw where it's leading to. The second Nevuah. They only saw the first, so they cried. Rabbi Akiva laughed. The laugh within the cry. And that's when they said, Akiva nechamtani, Akiva nechamtani, Akiva, you have consoled, you've comforted us. You've comforted us twice, like Nachamu, Nachamu. One comfort for comfort, and one to transformation of darkness to light. Why Rabbi Akiva? Because his name is Rabbi Akiva, Akev. He came from a situation of Akev, like the heel. The Ovis the Rab Nosson says the heel is the Malach HaMovesh Sheba Adam. The human being has all parts of the universe, where like a microcosm. What's the Malach HaMovesh? Akev, because the Akev has almost no sense, no feeling. It's the toughest part of the body. That's why it can walk on the ground. It's called Akev. Rabbi Akiva, till he was 40, he didn't learn Torah. Sforim, it says he was a Ben Gay, he was a son of converts, or a Gay himself. But then he became Kula Liba de Rabbi Akiva. The whole Torah Shabbat Peh is on Rabbi Akiva. 24,000 students that he had. And all that he achieved. So he was able to see, even in darkness, even in the Akev, even where others could not see. He could see the birth of Moshiach. He could see the birth of the Beis Hamikdash. Even in the desolation, even when Shu'alim Helchim, when you see a fox coming out of the Holy of Holies, that was once the most sacred place. It was always the sacred place and retains its sanctity, but in a revealed way, he was able to see. And through his eyes, we try to see through his lens. Earlier today was Shabbos Chazain, the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. This year it goes right into Tisha B'Av. So we know Chazain Yeshayo is the vision of Yeshaya, which is a vision, of course, of destruction, as we said in Haftarah. Comes the Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchever, and he says, Chazain, why is it called Shabbos Chazain? Because every Yid is shown the Beis Hamikdash from a distance, the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi, the third temple from a distance. In order to evoke feelings of gaguim, of yearning and longing, to do everything possible to rebuild, to get it rebuilt. He gives a mashal for it. Rabbi Hillel Paritsha brings this. So you could ask the question, Pshat is the opposite. The Chazain of Yeshaya's vision was a vision of destruction, not a vision of the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi. But the answer lies in everything we're saying. The destruction is Seisar al Manas Livnes. It's al Manas. It's a destruction not as an end in itself. It's an order for something to be rebuilt, something greater. But now it has to come through our effort. We can't take it for granted as they did the Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. They allowed it to be destroyed. So what the Barditchever is saying is the deeper vision, like the vision of Rabbi Akiva. He could see deeper in the very Chazain of Yeshaya, where one could see destruction. Really, you look deeper, it's not destruction, it's actually construction. And that's where the Haftarah concludes. That Zion will be redeemed b'mishpat, with Torah, with halacha, and v'shavah, it's captives, it's hostages, with tzedakah. So our Torah and tzedakah redeems captives and hostages, including those that are right now in Gaza, that we all pray for. Because that's the ultimate goal, that the of tipoda and freedom. That's what it all leads to. In the language of Chassidus, simsum b'shvil hagilui. The concealment, even the shviras hakelim, is b'shvil hatikun, in order for repair. is in order to bring deeper revelation. With that, I was looking at the Rishimus of Eicha from the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek has a Rishimus on Eicha in Eira Teira. It's printed now in Eira Teira Nach, Volume 2, page 1034, Aleph Lamed Dalet and on. And he says, an interesting expression he says here. So he starts with Eicha Yoshva Badar, of course. Alas, she sits alone. It refers to that. That's the level of Malchus, as I mentioned. So he says, just to read a piece from Eicha, so he says, Al derech hayedua, be'pirush godel havaya be'ir Elokeinu, that the greatness of God is seen be'ir Elokeinu, in the city of God. So Ir is referring to Asis, umekabelas machola esesvirus umiyichodes iman. It's talking about letters that receive from all the 10 spheres. Remember we said that Malchus receives from all the 10 spheres and is united with them. That's in good times. Ubegolas v'ani b'teich hagela. I am b'teich hagela, I'm within the Golas. Yoshva bodod, sitting alone, al derech mashakosu b'mitzeira bodod yoshev, like it says by a mitzeira, a leper, that he sits alone. V'leka yichud, and that yichud is lacking. When you sit alone, that's the antithesis of unity. So the unity is when things are in the best situation. Bodod reflects a separation, a dissonance, a disconnect. V'zeu keinenu, like the pasuk continues, hoysa kalmona. And she was like an almona, like a widow. A widow that's without her husband, alone. Leka aliyas hanashamas liskal b'teich malchus. You don't have the elevation of the souls to be encompassed within malchus. And he goes on to explain this. But then he adds in a parenthesis. He says like this, Hago, la'aniyas daiti, Tzemach Tzedek writes, my humble opinion, yesh leimer al derech sha'klolos yehafchu lebrachas, just as the curses will be transformed into blessings, im ken yesh leimer gam ken eicha la'aliyas. So based on that, you can also interpret eicha, which ostensibly on the outset seems like a negative, and it is talking about the negative things, the loneliness and so on, and the destruction. But you can interpret it la'aliyas. That's all toward aliyas. It's all a yerida for elevations. Like the klol is transformed to brachas. And then he goes on to say, V'chein ratzinu gamkin l'razal, peri gimel de bracha to ovis, Mishnah Beis, b'piru yoshav bodod v'yodim. So you see, bodod can also be seen alone, can be alone as a sad alone, but alone can also be unique. And he goes on to explain that Shem bodod yanchenu, it's a blessing that they shall dwell alone. Alone here in this case means unique, above all others. There's bodod, there's a loneliness that's below, where you're alone and separated and isolated, like by the Mitzvah, Golos. But bodod also has the meaning that you're above it all and you're beyond everything. The koyal Golos v'ani b'secha gela, he says, v'aynu be'eretz midbar. And then he goes on, Soma lecha nafshi be'eretz tziyadavke, zeh b'chinas tshuva. And that brings you mokem bali tshuva emdim, even tzaddikim cannot reach. So on one hand, yes, it begins with a yerida, a descent and a concealment, and a loneliness, a separation, and a negative dissonance, but it leads you to a place that's beyond. Raivid, the Kol Raivid, that says, L'maylim b'chinas harotzen, hamislavish b'ramach yivarim, ramach mitzvusesa. Higher than ishtalshlus. The level of kihula vadehu, b'chinas bodod, l'maylim b'chinas morim v'kodesh. So it's a uniqueness, an exclusivity type of thing. And lagia lebchina zu, and how to reach to this level is through tshuva. V'zeh b'chinas bodet k'pshutei, she'edei zeh v'yitzaku. And that's the connection. When a person is sitting alone and they feel isolated, they feel pain. And that causes them to cry out. And when they cry out, and that causes them to reach a place that's boded yanchenu. And he goes on to explain the continuing verses in the same way, revealing, like he said, the aliyas within the klolos. The Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah Parsha B'Chukesai, when he talks about the klolos, the Teichacha and B'Chukesai, so there he read the Tzemach Tzedek as well in his gloss, brings the Gemara Moed Katan, where Rashbi sent Rabbi Lozer to the Chachmei Ma'ariv in the west to get a Chachmei Ma'izrach, was it? To get a bracha. Rabbi Lozer went, and instead of brachas, they cursed him. He was mortified. Comes back to his father and says, brachas, they cursed me. His father said, what'd they tell you? He started repeating what they said, and his father said to him, no, brachas, they're all really brachas. So of course the question is, why do they have to say it in that language? So there's different commentaries that explain it. Tzemach Tzedek brings, based on the Alter Rebbe's beer, that the brachas, the klolos, are really brachas, that the klolos actually reveal even deeper brachas than regular brachas. A bracha is teva nirva nigla chsadim gluyim, but chsadim nistorim, like it says in Tanya chapter 26, from Alma Diskasi is dafke in a language that's the opposite. So it's not just that it's also brachas, it's actually deeper brachas, which also explains in Bolok when Bilam is hired, commissioned to curse the Yidden, and he ends up blessing them. And those blessings, Mateva Elecha Yaakov, become the greatest blessings, dafka from Bilam. Because Vayafich, the aficha, the transformation, Minei Bei Abba Lishde Bei Narge, to cut down the tree, comes from the very tree itself, the axe of the tree, the handle of the axe, is wood, is the ultimate transformation. And that's the ultimate meaning of Yehovch Yom Mel L'Soson L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevim. So it's worthwhile if you have a few minutes to look at the Eicha, the Rishimus of Eicha of the Tzemach Tzedek, where he takes the whole Eicha and explains it, the Aliyas, like he said. We should be Zeicha ready to this Aliyah. The Gula Amit is Vashlema, Yehovch Yom Mel L'Soson L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevim, and Tisha B'Av will be the greatest Yom Tov.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.